Recording. And we're live. Cool. All right. So we are back to talk about chapter 4 of the creativity talks, which is all about the precepts of creativity, which I love because it really unpacks creativity and what's important about creativity, why it matters, our drives, the reason we do it.
This is the academic part, but without it, then it doesn't come to this amazing climax right after, when you realize all the components of creativity all combine to function so powerfully for the human race and the entire world and everything in it. So,
Yeah. I mean, to me, this is like the kind of the meat of the book so far. It was a pretty like dense chapter, like packed full of a lot of really important information.
And I will send you the link so you can put it in here, where I do a lecture of this chapter. So the people that aren't super academic, that are reading the book, maybe just want to watch the chapter, watch the video instead of reading the chapter. And I condense the whole enormous chapter with all of the information into like 30 minutes.
Right.
And it's easier for some people to just listen to it. But anyway, so here we go.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm just getting to my point in my notes. Okay. So you talk about the definitions of creativity that are out there with the prominent scholars who are talking about creativity. And you mentioned that first, you mentioned it seems that most people have some personal experience with creativity. And because the proof is that they can manage to summon some kind of definition in this experience that you had with asking your students. And so you contend that the process of creativity is familiar even to non-creatives, or however you classify that type of person.
Just the fact that someone would say, "Oh, I'm not creative." Well, clearly they have an assumption or some kind of a relationship with creativity, and they've chosen that, they're not in a relationship with creativity, even though they are. So
right. And then after that, you have you say it, you pronounce it better than me. Csikszentmihalyi.
Oh yeah, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. I practice it.
Csikszentmihalyi.
Csikszentmihalyi, but I'm probably doing it wrong. But that's how I say it.
Yeah, Csikszentmihalyi. How many times have you said that word? Yeah, so he basically is saying that creativity requires a certain level of mastery within a specific domain, which you go on to debunk at a certain point. And then David Bohm, who's kind of more in your camp, let's say, believes that if every human would engage in creativity to their own individual capacity, then the world would be less fragmented and more unified. Yeah. So
David Bohm wrote the book on creativity, which is basically, my Bible. So he's a quantum physicist, and so he goes through things that I don't go through things, but I do borrow his major philosophy, which is just that our creativity is inherent in us and in everything in the world, and that our fragmentation is because we live like we just live in a fragmented world where we don't realize that everything is whole. And he calls it like, not like a hologram, but just not holism, but the fragmentation is what he believed separated him from, like, Einstein and from other physicists, because the fact that we are all connected and all matter is made of the same thing, and we're all entangled, basically, is what he bases his studies on creativity on. And Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, he's a scholar, and he's the leading scholar. And I love how I just have to argue with it. It's not true. And I know that it's not true because David Bohm was my first teacher. So I could read his work and say, no, that's not true. You don't have to be a leader in your domain. You don't. And you and I talked about this before. So anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a really external measure of what creativity would be. It seems like a very external measure of a very intimate internal process that has external repercussions. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And, once you get into his canon, all of his canon, not just this one particular book, he goes on, to talk about flow. And if you're a chef and you get into flow and how even as an artist, and you're not an expert in your domain, if you're just a chef at a restaurant and nobody even knows who you are, you're still contributing. So he doesn't necessarily support his own thesis in flow as much.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting.
It is.
Yeah, and then you talk about a lot of different thinkers, Daniel Pink from Why Right Brainers Will Take Over the World. And you talk about Elizabeth Gilbert and her kind of conception of creativity and big magic, which I loved personally.
Yes,
I loved
yes.
that book.
I needed it. Because I take it, and so do you. We take everything so seriously. And her, one of her main tenets was just don't take yourself so seriously. There's got to be a little trickster.
Totally.
You got to play. And actually, your whole thing, because you are very serious and intense, is to learn to play.
Yeah. Exactly. That's my medicine. That's my antidote to my small self or my false self. Right. Yeah. So yeah, I loved her story in Big Magic. My favorite was the story about the Balinese dancers and how, they started to perform their dances for the Western tourists, basically. And then at some point, these Western tourists came in, kind of like woke Western tourists, and they were like, wait, these are sacred dances. You can't perform them for us. You have to keep them private for your own culture, And so the Balinese made up new dances. So these are the ones we can perform for the Westerners. These are the ones we keep sacred, because the Westerners were like uncomfortable seeing their sacred dances or whatever. And then it just became this thing where it was like, wait, now the dance we're doing for the Westerners is also sacred, because the dance itself is sacred, right? The expression that the dance is the sacred part. It's not like there's some special secret sacredness to it.
I forgot about that. Did she do a TED Talk too about that?
I haven't seen it, but I just remembered that story because it was so classic. It's so classic about like the Western mind and categorizing things. Like, this is sacred. This isn't. It's like the whole thing is sacred,
Isn't that neat? I like that. Thank you. I should have put that in there. It's really good. I forgot all about that.
Yeah. It's a good one. But you put some other stuff in here. You talk about how she likens creativity to a ghost that flies in and out of a person's life, offering ideas. But only those with dedication can follow them to receive fulfillment. So that's a little bit like the muses in Greek.
Yeah, she does talk about that. Yeah. And so, and maybe that's true and maybe it's not for when you're trying to produce something. And that's why people get online and look up TED Talks on creativity and look up help me, I need to be creative, because they want to be more creative. And that's why my approach is not the how-to approach. It's not at all. It's why and what is. And then of course you realize every freaking thing you do all day long is an opportunity to interact with true creativity.
Yeah. And you get into that more as we go into this chapter. I mean, this chapter is so full of things. I think it might take us several episodes to get through everything, because I don't want to glaze over it.
Well, we can cherry pick, but the last one is the best one. I'm not the best one, but the one that, propels us to the next point in the motivational sequence, which is, what's the problem and what's the solution. So.
Yeah. You also talk about Julia Cameron and her reference to creativity as the abandoned orphan, and how she guides artists to recovering that relationship with basically their inner child, what like pop psychology, or maybe I don't know exactly what field of psychology would say is the inner child. And I love that really resonates with me. Obviously, my kind of like stance is that this is something that I experienced without self-consciousness as a child. And then, many of us experience the critic kind of take over, like, am I an artist? Am I not an artist? Am I creative? Am I not creative?
And don't you just love that you experienced it first, to where you realized, okay, I have an orphan, or you called it whatever, and I have a critic, and you called it whatever. Stephen Pressfield, I think he called it, I don't think he calls it a devil. It's just resistance, any form of resistance. And she calls it the critic, and I don't know what you called it. My best friend JJ calls things like the gremlins. But isn't it weird when you experience something and you discover it, you think you did, and then you read it like in a book and you go, oh my God, that happened to me. I had an orphan and I called it the critic, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's affirming, actually,
it's so affirming. Yeah.
being a kid in academia, as a young adult and everything, that I found that very affirming. And there's many points you make in this book, in this chapter, actually, that that resonate on that level, and we'll get there and we can talk about it a little more in depth. um I love this too. You talk about Freud. He theorized that creativity arose from the tension between the conscious reality and unconscious drives. And then you say, even sexual drives, shocker, which is really funny.
It is.
Yeah, I kind of guffawed at that one.
Thank you. Because I'm so not funny, but even if I didn't look it up, I could have guessed it without researching what did Freud say. But yeah, I mean, and any union of opposites, which you find in literature or art or anything, any union of opposites warrants creativity and that juxtaposition of because you're correlating.
Mm-hmm.
You're correlating things with your skill, your creativity skills, which is like divergent or convergent. You are correlating the union of opposites and realizing that, and then realizing that it's in nature everywhere.
Right.
It's that same affirmation when you go, oh my God.
And what the affirmation points to, it's not just, oh, I'm affirmed, my sense of self and my ego is affirmed. The affirmation is the unity. That's what's happening.
Yeah.
Right.
And David Bohm and David Pete, both doctors, use the word synchronicity. And I don't know if they coined it, like Margaret Sanger coined Planned Parenthood, I think, or voluntary motherhood. Like somebody will coin a phrase and then we adopt it in culture. And so synchronicity is exactly that. When you experience something and then you come across it, and it's a synchronistic moment, and then you're connected. You're just connected.
It's not an ideological thing, like your idea is affirmed, but that there is a consciousness that reflects the consciousness within you. That's ultimately what it is, right?
And it feels good to know you are where you need to be, and that all you're searching, that there's these little tiny little glimpses of truth, and that you're coming across them and you're digesting them and savoring them, and then you get another one and another one. And sometimes it doesn't happen. I mean, I've been dry from synchronicity for many months and many years, and then when it finally happens again, I feel like, okay, I feel connected. And it's not an ego thing at all. It's just a joyful thing to say, oh, it's like it's a way to connect, like, oh my gosh, me too. It's an aha moment.
It's the opposite of ego, ultimately.
Yeah.
So then you talk about nature and nurture and the environmental components of creativity. And then you talk about how researchers really study the traits in highly creative people, that it resulted in, like people like Einstein, Michelangelo, that resulted in them focusing on the elite and the educated, and of course white men, and that whole thing. But that they were unable to really find any DNA proof of creativity. And so they weren't able to quantify it really. And then there was the idea of convergent and divergent thinking that came out.
And they could measure, let's try and measure it. And last week or the week before that, we talked about the George Land study about the children and how they all tested geniuses. So this is fascinating, and we don't even have to go on to the components if we can unpack this idea that how can we study creativity and how can we measure it, and what happened when they did start studying it. Because I had to study the history of the study of creativity, because it's not like it's like when you study astronomy, they tell you, well, at first we thought this, at first we thought that we went around the sun, and I think, why do we have to study what we used to think? Well, it's all part of it. So in the study of creativity, you have to go back and look at how they tried to qualify and study creativity and figure out what it was. And then once you start reading that section and you get into these portions, well, first they thought this, then they thought this, then where we bring it back around, it comes back to what Elizabeth Gilbert says in the beginning about the muses. And it's like, oh, really? Oh, we're going to go that route? It's magic? Come on.
Yeah. But it's both, right? And that's the point of that story, about the Balinese dancers. And also you even say it right here, like once we kind of categorized creativity as a long list of mental processes, then it became, this is ordinary cognitive functions, right? That's what creativity is, but that's sort of the reductionistic version of it. But at the same time, it's like, okay, creativity isn't mystical and out of reach anymore, or elite anymore. It's ordinary. And that's really the fundamental truth of it, is that it's both. It's mystical and it's mundane at the same time, just as everything is.
And my brother did the chart for me. Did you see the chart?
Yeah.
How
I
it
wish,
just goes in a little
you could
circle.
show it.
Yeah, well, I should have brought my book with me, but I'll show it next time. I'll just hold it right up to the camera.
Here,
But
let me just share my screen real quick. I think we can
cool.
do it.
Do
Yeah.
it. Yeah, thank you. My brother Dominic Domingo.
Okay, you want to talk? Can you see it?
Yeah, I can. Let's see. So they start off, the Greeks saying that it's a divine characteristic, that it comes from the gods, and then they start saying, the scientists, however many years later, because really it wasn't a study. They didn't study creativity officially. I think it was more like after the 40s where it became a field.
Right.
But I'd have to look it up. I don't remember. Anyway, the conscious and unconscious, the straddling the conscious and unconscious, and how some people are in an environment where they can do that and some are not. And that's the nature and nurture, that some people just are at the right place at the right time and they're more creative because, whatever. And then the trait and the state. I don't know. I'm just trying to go too fast. What did I say about the trait and the state?
Let's see. Here, I can stop the share for a second. Or actually, no, okay, so they were studying the traits, and then where were we? You want to just get back into it and we can bring it up when we get to it?
Oh, yeah, I mean, and I don't have to explain each one. The point of that beautiful circle is that it just makes me cry, that no matter how much you unpack it and you unravel it, it's still a piece of God.
Yeah.
And so all the academics that poured their heart and soul into the study of creativity, Sternberg wrote the Handbook of Creativity, and Rollo May wrote a book. I mean, all the books that were written between 1945, they interviewed Picasso, they interviewed just all these artists. They got all the creativity quotes, like, how come you're so everything is pushed together, and then they analyze it, and it's still a force of nature.
Yeah.
It makes me cry. So that's the whole point of that. And, an academic person or, a scholarly person would want to see these studies. And they're all in the back of the book, every study,
Right.
and where I got my information. But, the way I put it together is my heart. It's my heart. That it is almost a religion to both you and me and like my brother Nick. And when you interact with it, and it's just like, you could go for hours on a Bible verse, you could go for hours on a Buddhist poem, and you can go for hours just looking at the force of creativity and going, I can't believe I'm a part of this and that I get to function with this. So the whole point of that is that study it all you want, analyze all the literature, all the academic studies and findings and interviews, and you're going to come up short, because it's just all that.
Right. And that's what you say exactly next in the book, is that we aren't similar to the process. It's not like we have a mimic of the process of creativity inside our own experience. We are literally the same as the forces of nature that are at work in the universe at large as creativity. It's intrinsic to what we are, to life itself, to existence, to
I didn't make that up. I mean, I get to repeat it in a little bit more articulate and exciting way than David Bohm, because he was just so precious. He was a scientist, and he talked really softly and really quickly, and he had a little like accent. But it's a big thing that you want to stand on the mountaintop and say. We're not just similar to like this great oak or the stars exploding in the sky. We are the same. It's the same matter. It's the same process. It's the one and the same. That is something to proclaim.
Totally. Yeah, it's beautiful. And
So I didn't
so,
make it. I didn't make it
sorry.
up. I got it from David Bohm.
Yeah, I mean the research is here clearly. And then you talk about, how neuroscientists came to hook people up basically to fMRIs, magnetic
Yeah,
resonance imaging, right?
yeah.
Um,
Encephalographs with the
and
little
yeah,
things on their brain. Yeah.
and started to measure creativity. And then they discovered the idea of the God spot, like the frontal lobes
Hmm.
of the prefrontal cortex. They house this segment of the brain that's associated with religious transcendent experiences. And it's the same area that lights up when creativity is employed. So
And
this
that's
is
so it was scientific that it goes back in that circle because they found that when they hooked the songwriters up, that's the light that went on, and it's the same light that goes on when you're praying
right.
and as when you're creating.
Right. Exactly. So prayer to me is kind of that putting into language usually that it's a dialogue, right, with creativity itself, with the Godhead, or the universal, whatever you want to call that, universal energy. And so that is one version of creation. Obviously, we're creating what we're saying. We're setting an intention. It's kind of
Mhm.
like the whole manifesting thing is like that's the creation, the creative energy happening. And then the actual creative process is not different from that. It's, we're making a pot, or we're making a painting, or we're, nursing a child, or whatever it is what we're doing. And then even I would be very interested to see the correlates between meditation and those states too,
Mhm.
because flow
Mhm.
state and meditation have a lot of um, correlation as far as, alpha versus whatever, like beta.
Mhm. Mhm.
So that would be really interesting to see too.
Well, and that's what's so cool about, like, I've only dabbled in each thing except, major fundamental Christianity. But when you see so you're like nursing a child, are you in a flow state? Meditating, what's going on with your beta waves, your alpha waves, your delta waves,
Right.
painting, what's going on, and just all the similarities between a religion, like Buddhism, or this whole manifestation religion, New Age, the woo-woo cult right now, right?
Hmm.
It's scientifically backed.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
even if you want to take it to the nth degree, and nobody would, I'd probably get my head twisted off for saying it, but Jesus and his miracles and
Mhm.
the surprises that he manifested, it's the same manifestation that
Wow.
that Jesus said, my you'll do better than your teacher.
I love that.
It's amazing. There's a book called oh, here I go again. There's a book on the Tao, Jesus Christ and the Tao, and Jesus Christ and metaphysical manifestation, and I'll find it and give it to you. And how he walked on water, and all of the miracles um, correlated with the New Age manifestation intention thing, which correlates with the meditation for better health, healing yourself. It all like the co-creation of your own physical body, and healing yourself. My brother's really, really into that. He listens to I don't know who it is, Esther Hicks maybe. So, but I love that I don't do anything heavily, but I can see but because of that, I can see, oh my gosh, that's all the same.
Totally. You can see the
Yeah,
correlation and the
yeah.
continuity. Excuse me.
Continuity. Yeah.
And I love what you said about Jesus too, and our ability. So in a sense, I would say that Jesus's ability to either create healing or, whatever instantaneously, is probably directly correlate to his lack of lack of ego, right? So
Ooh,
he's completely in the flow state all the time, the
mhm.
creative process all the time, because he is at
Beautiful.
one with the universe, right? So
Mhm.
our inability to manifest, or whatever, we want to, however we want to phrase that, is directly related to how much we're filtering our experience of the universal through the self,
Mhm.
right? Because the
Mhm.
self is a filter. It's blocking
Ah,
creative
great.
energy, right?
Well said. It's a
That what you
filter.
said about Jesus, it hit something. It was really
Well,
beautiful.
this is very powerful for me because this is like a conversation that I wasn't able to, or a dialogue or whatever, a perspective that is too, it's very dangerous to put into writing, right?
Yeah.
But there is a small following, or a cult, whatever you want to call it,
Mhm.
where the manifest type, hippie type people are really following David Bohm right now, which
Yeah.
thrills me. But
Yeah.
I just like when something is science based.
Right.
So, even when people channel spirits, I want to find the science behind that.
Yeah.
I want to find the science between epigenetics
Yeah.
and, whatever, what's it called? What the bleep do we know?
Sure.
I want to see the science behind it. I want to
Yeah.
believe in the matter all being entangled and the biology of belief. I want to combine it. So, but I
Yeah.
wasn't willing to put all that in there. So it's fun that we just kind of dabbled in that
Yeah.
perspective
Yeah.
because it's mighty powerful. It's so powerful. I don't even want to touch it.
Totally. And I agree with you. I'm the same way. Like, I want to see, I believe in metaphor. I believe in mystery. I believe in all those things. And I believe in that which we cannot explain, but those moments when we can explain it and we can bring something into our realm of understanding are magical. I mean, that's jnana yoga. That's the path of knowledge. Right.
Right,
And
and
so
it's
that's why science is so important. Not
and
only because it's from this kind of materialistic viewpoint, it's
Mhm.
verifiable, but
Verified.
because it unifies the intellectual self with that universal self, and so in that sense it's its own spiritual practice.
Well said. You sent me a JFK quote, just exactly that. Like when we think we have, the black and white thing that we're going to do, we need poetry because that unconscious human element is what we need in all of our process, whether it's political or just even in a small family or a community. We need poetry. We need to add the unconscious. We need to add that humanity to our stoicism or to our tenets that are so important. And it's a great quote. I didn't memorize it, or I would quote it.
Yeah, that's okay. I can put it in the show notes or bring it up next time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was surprised at it too, but I thought it really captured the essence of everything we're doing, the outward, like what I would call the solar or the masculine expression of the world that we're very tipped towards right now.
Mhm.
It's all equally important. But what JFK is saying in this quote is that the poetry is essentially like our conscious, like our conscience,
Yeah.
not our conscious, but our conscience, that's saying, okay, whatever we're doing here, let's not get lost in the weeds. Let's remember the essence of why we do it, which is our
Right.
humanity.
Hmm.
And that's why this discussion, I think, is so important, because when we
Well,
lose our humanity, then what are we doing? We're just ants building anthills,
And I like when you also bring it back around to like ego, small self, larger self, but where this whole section of the book is going to go towards the precepts, because this is just preliminary to what is creativity and why are we creative. This is why are we studying it? And so all this whole circle that we just talked about, and then all this ancillary stuff that we're talking about, like religion and faith and magic and meditation, all of this leads to the marriage of the seen and the unseen.
Yeah.
And because after I studied it for so long, I needed to package it, right? You got to package it. And I had to package it in a way that was not the manifestation community, and it wasn't Buddhism, and it wasn't Christian. I wanted it to be creativity theory. So this is my theory, that it's the seen and the unseen. And this is going to lead us into those precepts and help us understand that there's two sides to everything. Here's my hand. This is the seen and this is the unseen. And then when you start to filter everything through the seen and the unseen, the interior and the exterior, society and the individual, and what it means and how it functions for all of us, then it sounds really complicated, but we break it down. And we just led up to that when you just said the masculine, where we're tipping, and the yin and the yang, or the external and the internal. It's the seen and the unseen.
Yes.
We need
Yes, exactly. And that's the other half. I try to put it in non-gendered terms or whatever, but there's the internal self, or the internal experience, and the external experience. And I think that actually might be the best way I've heard it yet. That's completely hopefully free of any kind of stigma.
Exactly. Right.
And so I'm very grateful for that metaphor and that you've put forth in this book. Is this integration of the inner and the outer. And what we see in the world, I would say largely, is the ignoring of the inner.
In our culture, yes, and it screams at me. So for sure, because we have to end, but for sure, when we get together in the next time we do it, like 2 weeks from now, I'm gonna bring my metaphor, which is a pot, because this is right next after we talk about all of this stuff. Then I go into this metaphor of the pot, and I talk about the internal and the external. And so I will have my pot with me, and I will hold it up, and we will use it for the internal and the external, the seen and the unseen, so that it doesn't sound, it's not so complicated when you have a big fat object lesson to refer to.
Yeah, I love it. I love bringing it into the tangible once again and grounding it. And then we can do your pot exercise and meditation as well.
Okay, yeah, let's. Okay,
Cool.
so let's go into that now, and I am going to shut off so that I always do, but I'm going to shut off and I probably won't come back. Like I can see at the end of when we do this, sometimes I come back and I'm like, ah, I'm just not going to come back.
Right.
But
Yeah,
mwah.
that's fine. That's
Okay,
okay.
but I'm still
Thank
here.
you.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, just go ahead and shut it off. That's totally fine. Um, all right, let's go ahead and drop into our bodies. Dropping out of the head, dropping out of the exterior, as we just spoke about. We're dropping into the inner world of the breath, the inner world of sensation, whatever's going on inside, the side of experience that maybe we don't pay as much attention to, or sometimes maybe we even run away from. Maybe when we're experiencing difficult emotions, or maybe we feel a sense of isolation or fear when we drop in this way. But the more we get to know our inner worlds, the more we can actually connect to this subtle force of creativity that we're discussing, because that's where it resides within us. That's where that force makes its home within us. And that's why we are a part of it, because it lives there. So when we drop in this way, we're learning to listen to that latent force of creativity within us, to connect to that intrinsic quality that we all possess. So letting the eyes fall shut, reaching up through the crown of the head to keep the spine erect and relaxing the rest of the body. And just focus on the breath. I often like to think of the breath as flossing with the universe, bringing in the life force and spreading that life force throughout my body from the nose all the way down the esophagus into the lungs, expanding the belly and chest, and then all the cells of the body are also experiencing that oxygen. So just as Rene, spoke of breathing the same air as Keats, when you're in London, potentially breathing that same air, we're breathing the same air, the same life forces, every living thing on the planet. We're bringing that into our bodies. And then exhaling. And we become a part of that whole. We've exhaled a part of ourselves into that whole. So in this way, I think of the breath as flossing with the universe, communing reciprocally, sharing a part of ourselves and welcoming in that of the other, that of the so-called separate that is not separate. And just allowing the mind to rest on the breath. So whenever the mind becomes distracted, or it tells a story about the past or the future, or it starts to wonder what's for dinner or what you're doing tomorrow, you can just bring it back to the breath. Our minds are designed for problem solving and for action. And they don't want to sit with what is. They don't want to sit with the truth of the inner life. And so we can teach them, just like we can teach our children, to just sit and be and relax over and over again into the present moment. And to relax into the truth of our interconnectivity. Focusing on the inhalation as it fills the belly and chest, and the exhalation as the chest and belly fall. Feeling the breath on the tips of the nostrils, cool as it comes in and warm as it exhales from the body. Bringing in the cool air of the space around you, and exhaling the warm air from inside your warm, pulsing body, a body that is full of life and vigor and fire and vitality. Intermingling with the cool, open emptiness of the air and the universe itself. Knowing that there's nothing to do, no action to take, no questions that need answering, that all that we're doing is simply experientially touching the truth of our existence that's accessible to us at all times, no matter who we are, no matter where we are, no matter our gender, our roles, something we all share. And that the breath and becoming aware of the inner life can be a conduit to this experience, this shared experience of truth. Continuing to allow the thinking mind to dissolve into the breath. Dissolving the self into the universal.
Mm.
And then as you're ready, you can become aware of the space that you're in. Become aware of the body taking up space, the feeling and sensation of the space against the skin. Become aware of the building that you're in. Continuing to externalize the awareness. And then as you're ready, you can gently open the eyes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I think it's such a great compliment. It's such a good thing to talk about the external and all this conversation, and then just to bring it all back. I love it so
The
much.
vibe of it.
Right. It's a great I don't know if it's compliment, but whatever. I like your word conduit. I know I'm not supposed to comment. It's so great though.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. It fits
Yeah.
so well. Thank
My
you.
pleasure.
Okay, I'll see you in
Next
a few
time.
weeks.
All
Okay.
right.
Bye.
Bye.